Peter, I gotta love hearing from sort of like the private equity, like we said, the private equity world, the venture capital world, to distinct take on where we are.
Yeah, I find this minority investments from private equity firms so fascinating, and to hear the similarities and differences from Adam and from our owners so far is just really kind of strikes at the heart of where these teams are in this dynamic picture for the valuations. So not only do we have Ted, but we also have Eben, Novy, Williams.
A little bit of a line change. I'm going to let you guys take over with Ted, and I'll be back a little bit later. Hello, Ted, and thank you for joining us.
Sure. Why do you keep talking about private equity? The deal isn't done. They haven't been able to raise the money.
Yeah, well, so that's the most interesting part. So when they do raise the money, so obviously no investments have been made yet. I'm fascinated. I don't know, Ted, how much you were listening into my questions to Wick and to Mark, by this idea of, okay, they say they have raised the money and they invest in multiple teams at once, what that can pose from a competition standpoint in terms of potential issues. But you seem to...
Yeah, well, first, let me say the first rule on Fight Club is don't talk about Fight Club. And we honestly don't talk about valuations and financials. Our biggest stakeholders are the fans, and what everyone has said is really correct. They care about Stanley Cups and jewelry. Are you winning rings for your teams and playoff appearances? But I think on the private equity side right now, you have to have a really, really long-term view. Today you published your analysis and said the Wizards were worth $2 billion. And Washington Business Journal published a story about pretty much the death of downtown DC, and don't come to downtown DC, and all the stores boarded up. And my team has the most players with COVID, and we've missed the most games. So it's kind of left brain, right brain. Mm-hmm. Is it a good time that we're building value? And you're saying that the team is very valuable. I'd say over time, you are way conservative. And that while I appreciate very much what you've done, I'd have to say you've undervalued everything. Your first line in the session was it's a $70 billion business. Mm-hmm. And you see our CEOs really matter. Adam's worth $70 billion in leadership glow, I would say, if he were running a public company. And when you have Steve Ballmer as your number 2 investor, if you will, right? And you have to remember that the leagues and the teams, they appreciate, and then there are these events that really drive value. You mentioned expansion. I think Charlotte was an expansion team, was $300 million. And we had just come into the league at the time, and everyone would say, well, if Charlotte's worth $300 million, what is my team worth? Mm-hmm. Then you have a Steve Ballmer who comes in, who looked at this in the way that many of the newer owners have looked at. It's not just a team, it's a platform. And if you look at it really, really long term with reoccurring revenues, the total addressable market, you hear from private equity, what is the TAM? How big is the marketplace? We're still a small business, right? When you think about 8 billion people around the world, 6 billion now connected to high-speed connections. And, our cable ratings are, even though we're the number 1 rated show, pretty much up and down the line nightly, we're still small. We have a lot of upside. The tree can still grow to heaven, but it has to be over time. And so I do think the notion of how are these teams valued, you way undervalued or don't have a part of your algorithm, the whole ESG, what do we mean for our community? Investors really want to invest in companies that do good. That can be everything from voting centers to creating jobs to activating communities. Our practice facility is in Ward 8. It was a neighborhood that was neglected. We moved our headquarters for the Wizards, for the Mystics, for the NBA 2K team there. But we worked with the city and built the practice facility and then a 5,000 seat arena where the championship Mystics play. And the original Capital One arena that the Poland family brought in, it turned around downtown DC. It represented pre-COVID about 18% of all of the tax revenues, and we create jobs. And we do it in a way that rallies communities. And the thrill of having a winning sports team, when you fill the mall, I mean, it breaks my heart when I watch that we're going to have a new president and no one is allowed on the mall. And when the Capitals won the Stanley Cup, we had close to 1 million people in the city, all dressed in red. And so having that kind of platform that's local, national, and global, and then having all of these ancillary businesses. We're investors. I'm an investor in Clear. Clear has been very, very instrumental in COVID, in testing, and soon to say whether you had the vaccine through Health Pass. That'll help us to open up arenas and buildings. We're a big investor in DraftKings. And there, DraftKings is valued at over $20 billion. They do less revenues than Monumental Sports and Entertainment. We own the Caps and the Wizards and the Mystics and esports teams in the building. They're smaller than Monumental. And if you did a component buildup, you said we were worth $2 billion for the Wizards, maybe $1 billion for the Capitals, $3 billion. How is DraftKings on the public market? It's because of growth and TAM and first mover advantage.
So Ted, can you give us your numbers? If $70 billion for the entire NFL and NBA is conservative, or if $2 billion for the Capitals is conservative, what do you see these things as?
If you could right now buy the NBA in every team or Blizzard Entertainment, okay, they have a $70 billion market cap. They're about $8 billion in revenue, right? Who would you say is more valuable, has more reach, has more brands, more engagement? And so that's, long term, I think will be seen as being undervalued. Today, our revenues are cut in half. And there is a reason I think that Dial has struggled, or private equity has struggled, because they are about the money and you value these teams through your algorithms mostly on revenues. Most sports teams, what we've had to do is say, last year, 2020, planned for being down 20 to 25%. This year, plan to be down 50%. Next year, maybe because of the slow roll of the vaccine and working through credits, to be down 25%. Now, if you were a public company and that was the guidance that you were giving, your stock would be crushed. That's why we're private companies, and we don't think of it that way. We look at the long term.
Sure. So I'm hearing a lot of interesting things from what you've said so far, and I'd like to unpack two of them, which in two encampments include different threads from what you've said. So one is local, national, and global. And the other is these ancillary or related businesses that have grown so much. We have the Wizards in the top 5 in the league in terms of involvement in terms of Monumental writ large, but looking from the Wizards standpoint, the top 5 in the NBA in related businesses, and project that to be only growing even more going forward. So that's something that we recognize is an important part of your business model. So I guess starting with that, Eben knows a lot more about esports than I do, but I want to know what makes you a believer in esports on one hand, on one side of the coin. On the other side of the coin, ways in which sports gambling, you mentioned DraftKings. We know the first brick and mortar sports book in an arena is the William Hill deal in yours.
We're back in Sport Radar. Sport Radar is incredibly important big data company. I think that what COVID, its legacy will be after we learn and get through the human element, is that it's made companies like ours endemically digital. We've been in sports, bricks and mortar, traditional media, with kind of websites and some apps aside it. And we've looked at the teams, and we say half our revenues are from people coming into the building, and then the sponsors that want to reach them, and then the people at home in that local watching on television. And that has to change. That's why esports is so powerful. My good friend Peter Gruber and I co-invested in Team Liquid. And Team Liquid, Forbes is now running, I'm sure you'll be looking at the most valuable esports teams. And their growth is phenomenal, but their engagement in growth is phenomenal. Their revenues were a little bit not meeting plan because there weren't tournaments. You couldn't bring people in Madison Square Garden or big tournaments. And we play on all of the platforms, Dota 2, League of Legends, and the like. And the engagement there is off the chart. You know, Twitch is, I think, much more powerful of a platform long-term than ESPN is. I would look at how do we take our NBA 2K assets. We won the championship in the NBA 2K, and we really celebrated it.
Is there a ring for that, Ted? Do you have one of those?
We got just get the big things, and the rings will be coming in any day, and they'll be as big as the Caps and the Team Liquid. We have 2 championship rings for Team Liquid. We look at owning multiple teams, putting it on a platform, owning equity in our regional sports network, having our regional sports network partner own equity in our streaming capability and network, Monumental Sports Network. And so what we want to do is not focus on just the team other than the wins and losses, but look at the business as a platform. You know, Monumental, I tell people, is Alphabet, and the Wizards are Google, right? I mean, Alphabet is what's traded, and they're in many, many businesses under many, many different brands. And my belief is that long term, we have to get much more digital and global. And unfortunately, we're going to have to cut out some middlemen. Like when you look at the unintended consequence sometimes of policy, which I see as a big risk, right? Our cities, eminent domain to our buildings, rightly so. But that was a unintended expectation that our local governments would define when the city, when the metro, when you could have people in office buildings. Disney buys Fox and the government tells Disney they have to spin out their RSNs, which has changed forever the whole landscape of how local television is. We all deal with RSNs. RSNs deal with cable companies. It's going to force teams and leagues to say, do we need to? Do we want to? Should we? Should we change the nature of our partnership with the RSN? Should we go direct? Should we be going directly to the cable company, losing one of the middlemen? And so that's going to be a huge development over the next decade. But I think ultimately it proves the value in the teams because we have the software, we have the content. And new business models, why I love esports is just learning new business models. How are we going to get people attracted to the game? Well, every great video game is free, right? You get habituated on Fortnite, where investors in Epic Games that does Fortnite. Epic Games is huge. You just saw Sportico go public. You're going to see competition, video games, where there's professionals and competition. We should be learning from them because they upsell lots of interesting things. We roll out through Fanatics a third jersey, the City Edition. And in esports, they do skins like crazy. And the skins business is way bigger than coming up with a third jersey and trying to sell it through your stores and online. So I'm bullish long-term. I think you'll look back and it'll be quaint when you say these teams were worth 10 times revenue is basically what you're saying, 8 to 10 times revenue. But short term, I'd have to say, if our revenues are cut in half and we don't know when we can play with fans and we're at ground zero, short term, I don't know if private equity is a good solution for us because they want to come in and buy low. That is, most private equity companies are distressed buyers. I don't know if they would pay the value add as a minority partner does. When we won the Stanley Cup, one of my favorite moments was seeing my best friends and partners and their families with players on all the double-decker buses rolling down Constitution Avenue. You couldn't pay enough for that experience. And so the human side of it, private equity usually doesn't internalize. They want to know what the multiple is and when can they get out. And in many cases, you'll hear owners, me included, I never want to sell the team, right? We want to own the team for life.
How do you balance kind of this private equity discussion with the conversation happening internally across the NBA right now about expansion? If Dial is struggling to raise money for minority investment, is now the right time to think about expansion of the league? Is it a different buyer set when you're talking about owning the full thing versus maybe investing in tiny pieces? How do you think about expansion kind of through the lens of this conversation?
Well, the NHL just went through expansion. The most successful expansion team ever in sports were the Vegas Knights, who we beat in the Stanley Cup final. They're incredibly valuable. That was a great investment. It did well. It wasn't a distraction. And now Seattle has built a world-class organization. So we'll have 32 teams. NFL has 32 teams. I think it's just a matter of time to find the right partners and do the right thing. But no, we should not be planning for expansion to solve these problems. These problems that we have are deep, and they run through our partnerships, through our sponsors, most importantly, our players, our employees. And so I would say the focus right now should be on our partners, our people, and our players. I mean, that's what we've been trying to do locally and at the league. When you wrap in all of the issues facing us and our media partners, of the top 10 media companies, I think there's been 8 senior executive changes since we did the last deal. I'm chairman of the media committee and the NBA, and you don't know who to talk to in many cases, or someone new comes in. And so it takes time to rebuild that relationship. Probably our biggest, the step functions up in value. Steve Ballmer coming in and valuing us like a SaaS company, giving us a multiple on total revenues. expansion is an accelerator, and then a big transformative deal. The deal that we did with both. Yeah, the league deal was transformative for the players, for the union, for the ownership. What's our next one going to be? And you touched on this a little bit. The world's most valuable companies are the digital companies. It's Apple, it's Amazon, it's Facebook. In a way, they've been getting a free ride on our content. They have not really stepped up right now to get our content. And that's what, we have to look at. Should we become, if you will, more an end-to-end solution, or should we be doing bigger deals with those companies to stream both locally and nationally? I know locally there are more Prime subscribers in my media market than there are cable subscribers, right?
Part of that has been intentional on the NBA's part, right? I mean, Adam mentioned earlier about how highlight sharing is a form of marketing. So much of the stuff you see on Twitter is the NBA.
Yeah. I mean, I did the first deal and sold that idea at America Online over 20 years ago because we didn't have acquisition budget for the rights to stream games. But I do think that being able to truly innovate as a partner and take that content and slice it and dice it and have the camera angles and have the way you're showing. Now, ESPN is doing interesting things and having one game with multiple channels. We were the first to work with our local cable partner and launch a big data channel, if you will. You can watch the game traditional camera angles, or you can go to the overflow channel, and it's kind of a big data betting channel, different camera angles. We know that young people are so engaged with video games. They like a camera angle. You're on the ice, you're on the court, you're playing offense and defense. You find boring and static being kind of center court, 50-yard line. And we know that in our arenas, to me, the comfort, when I was listening to Steve, who I admire and think he's the greatest, I sat in seats 2 years ago. We spent $7 million and brought in new seats that today no one can sit in. And right, but I'm now way more focused in the connectivity in the building because that's the number one complaint. I'm going to the game. I want to post to Instagram. I want to be tweeting. I want to be gaming and gambling mobilely. How is all that going to happen? And so we're going to have to be looking at technology and networking in our buildings, and then the entire flow of how do you get to the game? You taking Metro? Are you driving? Are you in Uber? We're going to have to look at that whole experience because we get so many hours of time from our huge audience. That's the thing I also think you underrate in your algorithm. There's nothing that convenes and brings this many people together. That they're so engaged. They're so engaged. They need a second screen, right? It's not enough just to go to the game or watch it on TV. They need second channel and then another device to be able to interact. And so, again, long term, you're way undervalued us. Short term, you probably overvalued us just because of what COVID has taken its effect on us. I also think that there is a lot of money available out there, and interest rates are so low that really is probably the biggest drive of why a private equity company would like to put money into a safe investment, right? In that if you can appreciate over time 5%, 7%, and every once in a while have a kicker, if you will, and you can just carbon date our league over the last 20 years and see how many of those accelerants they've been, and you're putting your money into bonds, you're getting 1%, 2% return, we look like a good investment.
Well, Ted, as an observer of the industry, I applaud the upsell of the skin. As the father of an 11-year-old, I can't tell you how angry it makes me. That is so darn effective. So let's see what the sports world can learn from it. And we learn from you. We will be carefully watching what Monumental does and all of it, whether it's the Alphabet or the Google. We are very interested in what Ted Leonsis and Zach and the rest of the team is doing at Monumental. Thank you so much for joining us, Ted.
Thank you, guys. This is fantastic, and welcome. You guys are much needed in our industry.
And mine's not real, but, I do carry one with me, just like you do. So, just want to let you know you're not the only one with one of those.
You paid $1,000. I've paid over $1 billion to get my name.
Good deal for me. Thanks again, Ted.